listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the NFL Draft odds analysis and preview for Friday, March 30th, 2020. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
All right, diving in, talking NFL Draft. Racing towards the draft on April 23rd. I don't know that, in sports, Brian Blessing, Bruce Marshall in Las Vegas, I think it's hard to say racing to anything, Bruce, with so much uncertainty.
Yeah, I mean, we're in this, we figured it was going to be a little bit longer, this new pushback to April 30th. Sports-wise, I'm not sure that is going to change things much because I don't know that realistically anybody was talking about this starting even with no fans before June 1 for any league, whether it be NHL, NBA, baseball, soccer overseas, or whatever. Now the thought is, football season, all of a sudden they're going to have to start thinking about this a little bit if this thing extends much beyond April. Again, the interesting thing we talked on Friday, though, about it was the NBA. Mark Cuban has come out and some others about the NBA having some provisions to get this thing going, perhaps in June or whenever they did, without fans. I haven't heard what the NHL is thinking about that. Major League Baseball, at this moment, seems to be reluctant to look at that sort of an option. And goodness knows if the NFL, if it gets to that. I think those discussions are still down the road in the NFL. But to this point, Major League Baseball has been a little bit digging its heels in that they wouldn't do anything with fans. But all of these moves can be reconsidered, all of them. So it's only the last news flash, and that can change if the situation changes. But baseball, I think, is going to have to think about that because something tells me it could come back at some point, but without fans. And if they're reluctant to do that, they're going to have to revisit that decision.
And again, as you said, you can revisit it, but what a difference 72 hours makes. The news over the weekend on the COVID-19 front, certainly not good news in terms of, the projections of just how big the numbers could ultimately become. And then, the various levels of communities that buy in. Bruce, we poke holes at the young kids that were on a beach. We went through that. Some locales, you're seeing churches with people packed in like sardine cans. Everybody, you, me, so many people doing, what you're supposed to do, or at least they tell you you're supposed to do. But if others don't do it, the sad reality of this is just finding light at the end of the tunnel in terms of a realistic way that how does this thing end? Yeah,
well, it's that's the balancing act. Got to figure out what it is, and they'll have the more information they get, the more they can get some more accurate numbers on this stuff. At some point, though, they're going to have to open this stuff back up. You have to, or you destroy the entire economy and society, and they're not to that point yet. But at some point, they're going to have to start weighing that in because there's.
Hey, I'm not going to make you Oliver Stone here. Yeah. It's funny with the just what you said, and those thought processes were out there. That yes, at some point, listen, you've got to weigh one off the other. But the fact that was actually gaining a little bit of traction, then all of a sudden, these real dire numbers show up after that thought process had started to gain a little bit of traction. Again, you want to believe that you're being told what's actually going on here. I don't know. It's out of nowhere. These numbers, 100,000, 200,000 people are going to die. It's like all of a sudden, those numbers kind of appeared after the belief was, well, let's slowly start to open things up again. It seemed a tad on the odd side.
It did, and you heard a lot of stuff leading into yesterday, even after they announced that yesterday that this thing there should be a light pretty soon at the end of the tunnel. But I don't know. I'm not a scientist with this stuff, but
nor I.
You can gauge this and figure out what's going on and realize that there are consequences to this stuff too. I'm not doubting what they're doing now, but at some point, the consequences of doing this, and again, it's the old thing: is the cure worse than the problem? How many are you destroying more lives than you're saving? And they don't know about that yet, and they're going to have to start addressing that pretty soon.
But the NFL, the draft is clearly something that will go on, and it will gain a lot of traction, a lot of speed here in the month of April, as again, things are extended, social distancing and those thought process, at least through the end of April. The NFL and the NFL draft certainly gives us a lot to focus on.
Yeah, thank goodness we've had the draft to talk about. The NFL is keeping business as usual. And they're still pushing, there's some people pushing, we should, even some GMs for different reasons, just because they weren't able to do their normal prep work, that they should push the draft back some too. But I'm still in Roger Goodell's corner here. Like, we're not sure when this thing is going to get better, and we can conduct the draft and keep it within the guidelines of what we're supposed to be doing right now.
Oh, he got this one right.
Yeah, he got this one right. And but believe me, 99% of the public agrees with them here, and they want to see it. I mean, the sports fans too, and just people in general would like to see, something hinting at normalcy here in the NFL draft. Odd as the thing is, as unique a character as it is hints at normalcy.
All right, Bruce, and we are seeing more and more and more draft wagering opportunities that are starting to crop up. You would have things like Big Ten players minus $1.80 versus Alabama players would be plus $1.43 in the first round. Big 12 versus Pac-12 players, and the Big 12 is a monstrous favorite, minus a half, minus 275. ACC minus a half, minus 125 versus Pac-12 players. And the beauty of the mock drafts, you do your homework in these numbers. I'm not saying they're relatively easy to make, but they're usually right there, and it's a coin flip. But the thing is, there's always one, right? There's always one GM that just goes so far off the map that just derails what looks simplistic.
Yeah, and it only takes one, and that impacts picks after that too. So it can change the whole course of the first round and rounds thereafter. It's funny, most of the betting is all like on the first round. Once it gets after that, things go quicker. So all the bets are on the first round. And it always humors me that a lot of the draft analysts, you try to be an expert on this and picking some of these props, and you're going to have guys coming out and giving you angles on these props. You just don't know how this stuff is going to go. Generalized props, I think, are a lot more interesting than some of these more, specific ACC versus Big 12 or whatever. But they give you a lot of options out there, and so it makes it a little bit more fun. If you're going to watch the draft, you can have a little bit extra different to some different angles to watch and cheer for in the draft.
Well, if you've listened to this, Bruce and I are not spring chickens. We've seen most of these things, and the crazy thing is there's coach speak and GM speak, and you hear the same stuff year after year after year. But there are teams. It really kind of depends on what a general manager thinks of his team in terms of how far away we don't want to draft for need. We want the best player available. And a lot of them say that. And then a lot of them go and draft for need. But then the good ones are sitting there, and they're sitting there, and they may have targeted a wide receiver as a bit of a luxury pick because it's a good team with a good core. And all of a sudden, two goofy things happen in the first 18 picks, and someone picking down in the mid-20s, all of a sudden they go off the board of what a mock draft is telling you they were going to do, but their board says, no, this guy fell in our lap. He's the best player available, and that's our philosophy.
Yeah, and the free agent era has changed a lot of this stuff too. Before the free agent era, the draft was really the way you had to go to fill holes. If you look back at our previews, and we did this stuff, our reviews actually after the most recent regular season, and I did this review of every team after the 2019 season, and you talk about their needs. A lot of those, you address specifics in the free agent market, and that's where you draft or you sign for need in free agency, and the fact that there are several rounds here, and if there's a position where you think you can get a guy, in a later round, there's going to be options there. It impacts what you do here. So every year it shouldn't surprise me that teams don't seem to draft as much for need as I would think going in or others think going in. But the fact is, a lot of these teams address some of that stuff in free agency. That's where you can get really specific in this stuff, and it's more in free agency. In the draft, more teams seem to be usually seem to be going for that best player available thing. Not always, but more so than in free agency for sure.
They're not sexy picks, but it's literally the core and how teams are built to be good for the long haul. And that's total offensive lineman drafted in the first round. The over 5.5 is -215. Nice return, plus $1.70 on under 5.5. And these are the picks, Bruce. They really do. They build the guts of a team. But again, those that try to get flashy and make a quick fix. I mean, in a year where you're projecting 6.5 wide receivers in the first round, which is absolutely unheard of. This is the position where someone is going to have an amazing monster fall in their lap.
Yeah, and for me, well, I'm here. I mock these drafts too, and I have my thoughts. It's 5 or 6 in the first round that I'm thinking for linemen, just on my own projections here. But you're right; they do seem to. It's not the sexy picks, but these are important picks, and a lot of teams, figure out that they can build through the draft. And the linemen, it's interesting. Many of the linemen who come in maybe aren't quite as NFL ready and don't make the impact that some other positions can right off the bat. At least offensive linemen, maybe not. But
is that a function?
Yep.
Pardon me.
No, go ahead. Yep.
Is that a function of how the game's changed across the board at all levels, where it's an aerial game?
I think so. I think that could be part of it. But I look at a team like the Jets that had a crying need to rebuild its offensive front. Because, if Adam Gase wants to stick around to 2021, he's got to provide some better protection for his most valued asset, Sam Darnold. And it was pretty clear after last season, where do the Jets have to go? Offensive line. Now,
by the way, they got the running back, too. They got Howard.
Yeah.
So to establish a running. And if memory serves, last year, Bruce, there were games where the Dolphins ran the ball quite well.
Yeah, they were, but I'm talking about the Jets, though. Now, they came out.
Pardon me.
But they went out in free agency and literally bought a new offensive line. So they addressed all this in free agency with the line, so they can look at something else right now.
Which is no guarantee, by the way.
Oh, yeah, that's not either. Yeah, that might not be. They're just shuffling bodies. But Miami too, and they've done some things. Miami's been very active here, free agency, and some other things too. So it's the free agency. Has changed the dynamic of the draft a lot. This has been going on for a while with free agency, but the days before free agency, the draft was the only way you could go to rebuild and restock your team.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. I know you've done a mock draft. We've discussed that. But in terms of handicapping, the fact that all these offerings are there, I think provides a pretty interesting opportunity in that, okay, you've got a mock draft. But if you went in and said, okay, here are a handful of polarizing guys. We've mentioned someone maybe goes off the board, maybe trades up and goes and gets the Love kid, the quarterback from Utah State. Or there is this run on the wide receivers. Or maybe the wide receiver thing, everybody was dead wrong about it. And that's the position that not that many guys go. But when you do the handicap, you can say, well, what position? Are the linebackers going to drop? Maybe we were saying, is a guy going to drop? And now you says, are the offensive tackles going to drop? Or will there be fewer linebackers? Can you do the handicap in terms of, hey, we've got all these great players that are plugged in as first-round talents. But if someone indeed goes off the board, if there's 2 or 3 go off the board, is it easier to target the position that would prompt players to drop.
Yeah, that's interesting, Brian. And I think that's you're sort of at the whim there of this surprise move or two, because you can see certain positions, runs on certain positions,
Right.
more based upon one or two GMs deciding, okay, we're going to move now and get their guy, and they jump and they get a guy out of a position group that maybe figured to go later, and there starts to be a run on those position groups. So that seems to happen almost every draft. I will say this, though, just overarching, and we talked about this, I think, last week too, Brian. The one position group that just does not seem to be valued right now much is running backs. And to the point, we're not sure if any are going to get picked in the first round. And that's happened, a couple times here in recent years. Quarterbacks also seem to be, there's sort of a run on quarterbacks when there is, but they often get pushed back as well. And teams seem to be, they'll go get a receiver or linebacker and take a chance on one of those, but they're very careful about, making their pick on a quarterback here, especially a rookie. So, there's always a GM or two can change the course of the course of the draft and the sequence of picks just by surprising, a guy earlier than we thought.
Well, I mean, specific number of Ohio State players drafted. We know Chase Young's going. You want to say top 2, but if someone trades for a quarterback, but clearly the guy's, he's not going anywhere below the top 5. But you sit there and say 2.5 players for Ohio State. J.K. Dobbins is probably a first-round talent, the running back, but the question becomes what you just said. I'd love to take that, but that's a luxury item, and someone's going to get a heck of a running back unless someone takes him in the first round, which I'd be more prone to think a running back would drop out of the first round. And it could be, on top of it, he's going against the Swift kid from Georgia, that J.K. Dobbins specifically is the guy that you're sitting there projecting, do I bet over or under on Ohio State players drafted in the first round? And then it comes down to a philosophy of 30, you can't even say 32 guys because, the top 15, top 20 talent. Once you get into the 20s, that's when guys maybe could really go off the board.
Yeah, they can. Dobbins will be kind of an interesting guy because there's some people who like him more than they like Swift even. And would either of those guys get pushed up into the first round? I don't know. We'll see. I don't have either of them in the first round, so maybe I'm falling into this trap too. Ohio State, I had 3 in the first round, and that's including Arnett, the cornerback, late in the first round. We know Chase Young and Kuda, the cornerback, are going to go early, and Young probably in the first 2 or 3 picks, and the cornerback probably in the first 10, if not the first 5. So Ohio State, I'm thinking 3, but that third is right toward the end of the first round. And then there's the X factor of Dobbins that he could slip in there too if somebody really likes him. So that's kind of interesting on the Ohio State front.
Yeah, there's no doubt. I mean, I've seen, in some mock drafts. Yeah, it's clearly no knock on this kid, but from a bit of a luxury, not a luxury item, but the Bills gave up their first round pick to get Stephon Diggs. So, and they were going to take a wide receiver. And I'm seeing some mock drafts, Bruce. It's ironic you're mentioning Arnett. I see somebody has them. Arnett actually going to the Bills at 54, and forever and a day they've always had this connection with Ohio State. But I've even seen some mock drafts where Dobbins was a guy going to the Bills to go and join Singletary to have a good young running back core for years to come. But I've even seen some mock drafts, not that he goes there, but the fact that some people think that Dobbins could be available at 54 of the second round. He could go 20. He could go 54.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's the wide range of where guys end up and where they're projected. Really good one last year was I thought this was interesting. Back to Denver with Drew Lock, the Mizzou quarterback. I mean, a lot of people thought John Elway was going to take Lock in the first round at about 10, where Denver had a pick. And in the first round, because a lot of people thought Lock would be a first-round pick, Denver traded down in the first round, ended up taking Noah Fant. But Lock was still there in the second round when Denver's pick came up in the 10th spot in the second round. So they plucked him then. So, yeah, some of these guys can drop a full round from some projections or move up in some cases. And those Ohio State guys kind of fit in there. I've seen Arnett, forecast anywhere, 25 to 50 or even a little lower, like you had the Buffalo thing. And Dobbins as well, late first round up to late second round. So it can vary. And again, depending upon how the trends go in the draft, and that will be up to some of these GMs to make interesting sticking their necks out.
Yeah, it's such a wild dynamic to this where, Jordan Love from Utah State, the quarterback, some people say, oh, he's the next Mahomes, and people are wowed by him that he becomes this first-round guy, and some people have him really high in the first round. Some people say Mike Belichick, step up to the plate, and they get somebody to replace Brady. Here's an interesting one. The Love thing, not that it was a smokescreen, but he just doesn't go that high. And I see a mock draft where he goes to Tampa Bay, and you go, what? Well, wait a minute. I mean, Brady's got what? He's got 2 years in him. Who better for a young quarterback to learn under and get the quarterback of the future? That would be a really smart move. But the question is a guy like that available at 45?
Yeah, and Love, is really an interesting case because he jumped up these boards all after the season and workouts that he had, and then in I think he was in Indy too, and so all of a sudden he went from being a mid-second, third-round pick. Okay, now they got him up in the first round in some of these drafts. I mean, at one point he wasn't really regarded higher than Jake Fromm or Jacob Eason, who were a couple of other quarterbacks who figured to go right after the first wave of quarterbacks. Love could be one of these guys who is. I'm curious to see him, and I've been rethinking this quarterback total projection. At one point 3.5 seemed to be the number of quarterbacks in the projections in the first round, then 4. This is all assuming all these GMs are going to be in love with Love, no pun intended there. But I'm beginning to think, I've seen this before, and I go back to Drew Lock last year. I mean, quarterbacks sometimes they that's where the biggest drops in some of these guys are. Dan Marino, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Lock last year. Sometimes they don't go as high as you think. So Love, I'm not as sure as I was a couple of weeks ago that he's definitely a first round pick.
Well, and here's an interesting betting opportunity with Burrow going 1 overall to Cincinnati, unless something insane happens there. But the discussion on Tua Tagovailoa is just he's minus 1350 to be the second quarterback drafted. Justin Herbert's plus 475, and Jordan Love, who we just got done talking about, plus 1,700, and the Fields plus 2,300. I could see taking a mini shot here with Herbert plus 475, because the one thing is all this stuff, and especially when you're talking about that high up in a quarterback, there's a lot of smoke screening going on, and guys leak things out, and this guy's interested in that guy. But the one thing is, Tua is oh boy, everybody at the Dolphins or this one or that one has got to go up and get. And I really wonder. And if you go to the point where we sit now, Bruce, no one's doing workouts with these guys. It's a different animal. And I wonder, not that he doesn't turn into a great NFL quarterback, or, hey, quarterbacks, it's a crapshoot. Whether a great college player translates to a great NFL quarterback, but just the injury itself. Has anybody even broached the subject? Could Tua be a guy? I'm not saying a Brady Quinn kind of drop, but could he go down because people are that's just too much of a risk to take that high up with that injury?
It maybe, although I think from what we've been hearing, the word was that even Nick Saban and others have told the NFL guys that Tua is okay now, and the word seems to be that he's recovered. But that was still a very serious injury last year that he had.
Okay, now doesn't mean it won't happen again.
Yes, and so are they really going to take a look at him? Personally, I think Tua, even if he's healthy, would be really good. But again, he had quite an advantage at Alabama.
I know. That's the supporting cast. Yes, he did so many great things, but in a weird way, some guy, some 6'4" athletic guy that was terrific on a bad team, to me, almost has more upside than a guy like this that was surrounded by NFL players his entire career.
He had receivers running wide open most of his college career, and I mean, I know he's good, but I mean, a lot of guys, didn't have that, and to me, it kind of goes back to that draft in 2005 or the 2006 draft, I guess it would have been. It was the year Vince Young came out and Matt Leinart came out and Jay Cutler came out. Now Cutler didn't have Cutler's career a little bit, say what you want, but he had a heck of a lot better career than Leinart or Young in the NFL. And coming out, I remember thinking back then, this guy played at Vanderbilt and he looked good at Vanderbilt.
I think Leinart is a great comparison.
Yeah. And Leinart had everything going, looking for him there at USC, and it just wasn't. You're not in the same situation in the NFL, so yeah, that's certainly something to think about.
And then so much of it is, what we warn the bettors: don't overreact to what you last witnessed. Well, what we last witnessed here, we know what the game has become, but in the last couple of years, all these guys, all the GMs. I want the big, tall guy that can see passing lanes and the pocket guy. But in the last 3 years, the impact guys, Deshaun Watson, Lamar Jackson, and Patrick Mahomes wins the whole thing. So it's the guy that can run around like a reindeer with a gun.
Yeah, and they want guys who can move around a little bit now. So, and I think that's kind of an interesting change here. So in that regard, maybe Jordan Love does become sort of a guy that people want, although there's a lot of other aspects to it as well. Herbert from Oregon is very interesting because he can move pretty well, and I think that's one of the appeals he has. And if someone indeed wants to jump and take a quarterback above Tua, he would be the guy, although the odds seem to be against it. What I think is most interesting here about Tua and the whole quarterback thing, if there's a trade in the top 5 or so picks, my gut feel is, though, even though we've talked about Tua and some of the questions, it'll probably be because of him. And since Miami is sitting there at 5 right now and is certainly going to take a quarterback there, and from what we hear, wants him, is Miami going to risk somebody else leapfrogging it to get up to 2 or 3? There's been even talk, the Redskins, it's not totally sure what they're going to do with Chase Young. They might even look at a quarterback there. Is Miami going to sit there at 5 or make a trade up? And if they get any wind that somebody else is going to come in there and jump ahead of them and take Tua, then they think we better get Herbert then. Do they make a move? But I think there's going to be a trade in the first 5 picks to do with probably with Tua and some team wanting to jump up and take him or prevent others from taking him. And that would be where Miami, I think, could even move up from 5.
All right, wrap it up with this. In many instances, stuff that, a team that makes a bunch of picks that don't look real sexy, they just drafted good football players, can have the best draft, and get a grade of C or something, 10 minutes after it's over. But, the one that sticks out like a sore thumb years ago is the Herschel Walker trade, which basically got the Cowboys a boatload of Super Bowls. So that's how important this day can be. And we always wax nostalgic, and you're a historian, Bruce. You got a favorite draft memory or two?
Well, God, every year is a draft. What goes way back for me, and this changed the course of these franchises in the early 70s when this would have been the 1971 draft, which was in January back in those years. And the Bears were sitting there ready to take John Brockington from Ohio State at 11. And here comes Green Bay in at the last second, made a deal with Denver, sent them a quarterback. Lou Saban was looking for a quarterback, sent them Don Horn, flipped with Denver in the first round, put the Broncos that was right ahead of the Bears, and the Packers took Brockington, and the Bears didn't take Brockington. However, because they didn't take Brockington, we later on this figured out. That's how Walter Payton ended up there a few years later. So this thing has
it's a domino effect that sometimes you don't see for years down the road. But little things like that impact the future. And I always look back and say, geez, what if the Packers and Broncos didn't make that trade and the Bears took Brockington? And I mean, football history might have been different. They might not have been ready to take Peyton or been in a position to take him a few years later. So anyway, interesting stuff.
Oh, we could do a week's worth of stuff just on memories like that. Yeah. It's always great information. Our good friend Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. I'm Brian Blessing. We're in Las Vegas, and we're heading towards the NFL draft.
Let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com, and reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At betmaker.com and the Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling. An approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.